Hello, my name is Matt, and if anyone needs translators, we have some. Thank you. So please just look in the front table right in front of the projector. Great. And I will be your presenter today. And the first thing I always do is try and buy your love with candy. And the way I do that is by giving everyone differently abled jelly beans. And these are the ones that Jelly Belly can't sell because they're not perfect. And so I get them and I repackage them as differently abled jelly beans as a metaphor for diversity. Just because something doesn't look perfect, it doesn't mean it can't be good, just like people. So please enjoy that. And if anybody wants any more jelly beans, I have a backpack back there with plenty of them. And so if you're interested, please grab a couple more for your ride home or for other people. Some people don't like jelly beans, but they like the idea. And so that's totally appropriate too.
Question for you.
Yes?
Out of curiosity, where do you get these uniquely shaped jelly beans?
Yes, good question. The question was, where do I get those? Well, we used to have a Jelly Belly distribution warehouse in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, towards Milwaukee, but a little bit south. And then they moved to Nashville. And then I needed to get them shipped from Nashville. And then they closed that one. And so now I have to have them shipped from San Francisco. And it's almost as much in shipping as it is to buy cases as it is for the jelly beans because they're so heavy. But it's a good investment for me. It also has my contact information if anybody ever has any questions or anything like that. It's a good way to reach me after the presentation as well. No problem. Thanks for asking. And then I've also wanted to try and entice you into thinking a little bit in the beginning of the program. I've stolen 2/3 of the ideas here from Verna Myers. Many of you have probably heard this before. The reason why she wrote the poem was to illustrate to everybody kind of the evolution in language. And so many people have heard before, the diversity is being invited to the party, which it is, and it's great. And then inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's a little bit more of a participation, and I really like that. And I was doing a program at UW Oshkosh, and they had those two up on a big banner right outside the room where I was going to do a presentation. And I was like, yes, but we're moving into belonging, and belonging is being the DJ when dancing isn't your thing. Because if you're included in the space, but you're still not bringing value, then why are we working so hard to include you? Hello, I know you're coming in. This is wonderful. We've got some jelly beans and some magnets for you. And Sally is helping, so please grab those before you come in. And the jelly beans have a neat idea on the back of them. So thank you very much for being here. Awesome. And the ending of this being the DJ part, that's also part of my story because when I was back in high school, which was a long time ago, I really wanted to go to a school dance. But I was a little scared of girls and I didn't really know how to dance. And so at the time what I did was I started a DJ service, which was the first time I was able to ever go outside of my home into a large space and deliver value to an entire group of people all at the same time. Now, let me ask everyone in the audience, how many of you get to go outside of your home and your role or your position in whatever organization you're part of allows you to maybe impact other people's experiences? How many of you get to do that? Wow, that's really, really good. And really, we're very, very lucky for that. Now, that feeling that we have when we can impact other people, that's a very powerful word right now that's kind of penetrating our national conversations in many, many different areas. And what that feeling is actually called is agency. A lot of people say, well, that person didn't have agency, and so how can they possibly be successful in that position, blah, blah, blah. But they never actually take time to explain what agency is. And so what I'd like to do is just give you a simple definition. Agency refers to the capital A ability of individuals, institutions, or organizations to act, to have influence, or to transform your experience or other people's. And so when we have that ability to go outside of ourselves and into another environment, and when we have agency in that environment, we can act, influence, and transform other people's experiences. That's where meaning comes from in most of our lives. And so The challenge we have is many times people with disabilities don't have equal access to employment, or they don't have access to the ability to operate outside of their home in a way where they can act, influence, and transform other people's experiences. And because that's where many of our, meaningful relationships come from, and meaning comes from work, many times people with disabilities are denied one of the most basic things that motivate all of us. And I come from the HR world, and what we want to do is get people into successful work outcomes and have them stay there. And so what we want to do is try and give people as much agency in their space as we can possibly give them, so we can retain them as employees and help them have successful work outcomes. And so everything I'm going to be talking about today is going to be trying to help you understand better ways for you to create agency within your own life and your own space, especially in work. Okay, are we okay with everybody so far? Okay, good. And at any time, if I'm talking too quickly, or if you want to have more information about something that I'm talking about, just raise your hand or interrupt me. That's totally okay. I'm also a bit of a fast talker, and so I get very excited about them. And if that happens, then please slow me down. It's no problem at all. I just want to make sure everybody's with me at all times. Cool. Now, I do need to give you a little bit of background, and so I'll be reading my own biography, which is a little weird, and so just go with me on this, but I want to give you some background information. I served as the Inclusion and Belonging Director for the Wisconsin SHRM State Council. SHRM is the Society for Human Resource Management. It's the largest HR organization in the world, and what we do is help create all of the policies and procedures for the best way to hire and fire, and to try and create good, positive cultures so people have, again, positive work outcomes. Currently, I'm the Jefferson County SHRM Chapter President. My chapter won a SHRM Pinnacle Award, which is the highest award that SHRM has to offer internationally actually, last November for our How to Hire International Workers State Conference, held at UW-Whitewater. We actually put together the first conference specifically to give best practices to HR professionals and their business owners in the state of Wisconsin, actually in the Midwest. And what we conducted at UW-Whitewater, and we won a Pinnacle Award for it. So it's pretty exciting. I was a member of the State of Wisconsin Partners in Policymaking for People with Disabilities Council, and served on the State of Wisconsin Governor's Rehabilitation Council, the Wisconsin Easter Seals State Board, and the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater's College Arts and Communication Dean's Advisory Board. I was also a member of the United States Paralympic sitting volleyball team for 8 years. I played matches in 26 countries, and I also competed in the 2000 Paralympic Games in Sydney, Australia, and in the World Championships in Cairo, Egypt in 2002. In 2017, I published my first book, Able-Bodied Like Me, which Kirkus reviewed as a perceptive discussion of disability and bias. And my personal lived experience. I was born in 1973, pretty good year, by the way. That was the last year it was illegal for people with disabilities to go outside in Chicago. If you don't know about the ugly laws, it was pretty amazing. Most large cities and municipal areas actually had laws that prevented people with disabilities from going outside, because able-bodied people just didn't want to see people with disabilities. But thank goodness, Chicago in 1973, last city that finally removed all of those limitations. I also was born, or I graduated in 1991. And so I had the first half of my life really not having the rights that I felt like I deserved. Actually, I consider it absolute entrance into things. I travel with the assumption of access, just like most people. But I had the first part of my life where I was trying to live my life going to the bathroom in McDonald's bathrooms, because they were the biggest ones. Right? But in 1991, then I started to understand what it felt like to have rights and to be able to have conversations with people, which allowed me to be more included than I was before. And so my birth drew attention, because even though I was healthy, I was born without legs. And I have over 30 years professional career as a motivational speaker and an advocate, and I've delivered my messages to over 1 million people at hundreds of regional and national conventions, including presentations to 2 sitting presidents of the United States, and I've spoken at over 2,000 colleges across the United States. And so I have lots and lots of experience. But the problem is, do you know what all of that experience truly gives me in a typical work environment? No experience at all. All of these wonderful things make me completely unemployable. because I really don't have any practical work experience. The most I ever had was back in 1996. I worked for a company called AT&T. I used to sell telephone systems door to door to small and medium-sized businesses. And so I would come into a town and I had this telephone system hanging around my neck, and I would knock on doors and I'd be like, "Do you like your telephone system?" And 1 in 10 businesses didn't. And so they were looking to buy a new telephone system. And at the time, we were selling the miracle technology and efficiencies of voicemail. Ooh, yes. And so it was really quite a life. But then when I made the United States Paralympic team, that's when I started speaking professionally and traveling and training for the Paralympics. And so unfortunately, I haven't had really need to create a resume or apply for a regular job since 1996. Now, I've had some pretty amazing experiences since then, and I've done a whole lot of stuff, but the real problem is, how do I try and convey all of my accomplishments into some kind of a talent stack that would allow employers to know that I would be a good person that they could possibly employ? Well, let's thank Sally, who's actually in the back, and I want to let everybody know she saved my life. One of the challenges that I've had is because of politics and because of a lot of things that have changed in our culture, the value of an inspirational speaker, one with a disability, or as a person with my, experience, it's just not valued the way it was before. In fact, in many states, it would be illegal for them to actually hire me to come in and speak at their college. And so the thing that validated me the most, the thing that I thought was my identity, I am now basically not allowed to do in any productive way where I could make a living doing it. And so I still want to be somebody that helps. In fact, all of the work that I'd done, all of the advocacy and stuff like that, all that is me getting up every day going, I can make a difference. I've got a story that I can tell. I've got specific knowledge that I actually can help people based on what they're going through. And I had the opportunity to do that for over 30 years, which is a pretty good run. But now, after that life has changed, I found myself sitting at home a lot of the time, wondering if I'm still valuable, wondering if I can contribute. And so what I started thinking of is, boy, I know a lot about HR and I know a lot about hiring and stuff like that. Why can't I try and find a job that would allow me still to contribute, but specifically in an area that I might know something about or something that I could learn about where I could still bring value? And there weren't a lot of opportunities for me to do that because I started applying for jobs, and unfortunately it's pretty difficult for a person with a disability to get a job because a lot of times, and many people know, a lot of times people only see what's on the outside, and because they might have had a bad experience or something like that when they tried to help or employ a person with a disability, many times people with disabilities aren't given the same chances that able-bodied people are just because of general assumptions and stereotypes that unfortunately I have to deal with when I interact with people. In comes this wonderful, wonderful experience. And it was put together, of course, by the Wisconsin Board of People with Developmental Disabilities and Sally. And she sent me emails. I was on another Partners in Policy board with her, and she did a lot of training for me to teach me a little bit more about the history of people with disabilities and access in the state of Wisconsin. And they have this wonderful thing called a fellowship and an internship. And the fellowship is a wonderful opportunity that people can apply for once a year, and it's a year-long program, and a person who actually applies for it can receive this grant. It's about $60,000. And then what Sally does is she helps find that person a position somewhere in state government in some kind of a related group that would be interested in having a person with a different perspective come in and add value. And I heard about this, I read about it, and I went, this is my perfect job. This is something that I should absolutely do. And of course, part of the requirement was putting a resume together that was very intimidating for me. I didn't really even know what to include on it. And sure enough, I was afforded the opportunity to actually do an online interview. And we began the interview. It was a 30-minute interview. I think there were 4 or 5 questions, and it was 30 minutes. And so she said, okay, you've got 30 minutes. You can read these questions and then, go. And because I'm a professional speaker and I have an overinflated value of the person that I am, I think people call it grandiose narcissism, right here, absolutely. But I like to help other people. That's my thing. And unfortunately, I started talking. And 28 minutes later, Sally said, well, you've barely answered the first question, And it's been 28 minutes. We only have 2 minutes left, and thank you very much for your participation. Now, as a person with a disability who's always given a second chance, I immediately emailed her and said, hey, I made a mistake. This is a huge mistake. Can I possibly have another chance to do the interview over? And you know what? She said no, because she treated me like everybody else. That's extraordinary in my life. Because of low expectations, many times people give me the benefit of the doubt. And so I was really destroyed. I couldn't believe it. And she said, well, we have this thing called the internship program. And what that is, that only lasts for 6 months. You still get paid usually $20 an hour. It's 24 hours a week. But you can apply for that and see what you can do. And I was like, okay. And I was applying for other jobs. And unfortunately, I wouldn't even get interviews for the other things that I was applying for. But it came back up, and I said, well, why don't I try it? And so I actually, there we go. Oh, if you want to know more about the internship, talk to Sally. But I just given you a little bit brief, some information about it. But I was lucky enough to be a person that they selected for their internship. And so what that did, it gave me an opportunity to choose which place I'd like to work in the government. And one of the places that I could choose was the Department of Transportation. And for me, transportation is kind of the mode of my life. I really am not somebody who can go on nature walks. You know what I mean? I can go to Devil's Lake, but I drive around a lot. You know what I mean? A lot of things aren't accessible, but for me to go outside, it really has everything to do with being able to drive. And so I'm really involved in transportation all around the state of Wisconsin. I thought it would be a great opportunity. And luckily enough, Sally had a relationship with June Coleman, and she's part of DBSI, which is the Division of Budget and Strategic Initiatives. And with June in leadership, she actually gave me the chance to work in 3 different departments within the Department of Transportation. And I had some pretty amazing experiences. I'm just going to go through a few of them here. The first thing was I had a chance to work with the Department or the Division of Transportation System Development. And what was interesting was they gave me a few tasks, and the tasks were to look at the things that were online, like all the ADA forms and the ADA policies and things like that. And they made an assumption that I was an expert in ADA simply because I didn't have any legs. Unfortunately, I truly didn't really know anything about ADA policy outside of the hiring and the firing from HR. And so I had what they call imposter syndrome. I don't know if anybody here has ever had that. What that is where you're given responsibility in a role that you don't actually think inside that you're qualified to do. Maybe you haven't had the experience that you think other people have had, and so you start questioning yourself and maybe even the ability for you to be able to do that job. I had that quite a bit, but I would like to be successful in every environment, and so I decided, well, I better learn the stuff, and I'm not going to tell them that I really don't know. And so, not overnight, but over the course of the first few weeks, I became very familiar with the requirements for forms on the Department of Transportation website, and I started constructing. Hi, you guys. Thank you for coming. In the beginning, I gave everybody magnets and some jelly beans. And so I think Sally's going to come up and give you some of those. The jelly beans have some neat ideas in them, and so feel free to enjoy them and read the back. Thank you. And so they gave me this wonderful opportunity to start changing all of these things on the website, but what I was doing was I was constructing them the way I knew how in Word. I started rebuilding their forms and stuff like that. And Jen came to me and she said, yeah, we really can't use Word to upload things to the website. We really need you to do these in Adobe. And I looked at her because I only thought I was an intern and things like that. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, but that would require me to learn a completely different system. And she looked at me and went, yeah. I know, right? And so I went home for a couple of nights, and then I learned Adobe. And I learned how to, transfer the information from Word into Adobe and make everything work in that system. Because that was the requirement that was put on me if I wanted to be successful in that environment. And because I was successful, they gave me more things to do. I actually developed the 2025 Effective Communications Plan for Accessibility Accommodations. And so if anybody in the Department of Transportation is going to have a meeting and they want to make it accessible with our translators, people like that, they had to have an official policy, and I had to go and figure out all of the people that we had relationships with, all of the businesses that we do business with, all of the plans and all of the forms. And so I created that document for them, and it impressed them. And so then they went and gave me another opportunity, and I'm sorry, flip, there we go. And this one was, there we go. Yes. And so within the Department of Budget and Strategic Initiatives, they asked me to create something called an RFP, which is a request for proposals. And so when things want to get done in the government, they usually have to ask people for people to put bids together to see if they would be qualified in order to try and lead these initiatives. And they asked me to do a request for proposals for Paralympic transit in rural areas. And I immediately came back to them and I said that would never work because I had practical experience putting together a wheelchair basketball program in southern Illinois in the St. Louis area. And what we thought we were doing was actually creating a wheelchair basketball team, but truly what we were doing was organizing paratransit. In order to try and get all of the kids with disabilities to be able to come, because very few parents have an expectation that they need to think about ways to get their child with a disability to a competitive sports situation. And I knew that it was not cost effective. And I said, there's no way that these rural transit authorities are going to be able to do this and make money. And that's when she said, we don't have to make money, we're the government. What we need to do is try and provide equal access to everybody in the community to try and give them the same quality of life that other people have. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is great. And so then I learned how to develop an RFP, and I compared other old RFPs, and it turns out they liked it so much, it's in funding consideration this fall and going into next year, so we can try and design a better transportation system around the state of Wisconsin. There are two pretty effective transportation systems that do that in the areas of Platteville and Door County right now that we're going to use as models for the rest of the state of Wisconsin, which is very exciting. I also had the chance to develop the ADA toolkit. It turns out all the things that I was creating were helping web developers and people within the Department of Transportation create better documentation for the things that they were uploading to the web. And we had so many tools, so many individual documents that were just all around the website. I went back to June and I said, I think what we've got here is an ADA toolkit. And she said, Matt, we love this. You're taking initiative and you're bringing larger value than what your initial projects were doing. And so that's when I learned that I could maybe take a little bit more risks and try and take on more responsibilities. And then the largest thing that they asked me to do, and I was part of OBOC, which is DTSD, they were having lots of people who were trying to access our Wisconsin Department of Transportation outward facing websites using assistive and adaptive technologies, and people were not having success. Now, the reason why that's a problem is by April of 2026, if our website isn't completely ADA compliant, the Department of Transportation will lose all of its federal funding. And so because of the amount of complaints that they were getting, they needed to have something done. And so they came to me and they said, Matt, could you have a bunch of your friends with people with disability friends that use assistive and adaptive technology come and evaluate our website? And I said, of course, but the problem is I don't really know a lot of people that use assistive or adaptive technology in that way. But I reached back out to Sally, and Sally had all these contacts in DHS. And so she was able to help me push the idea of what we were trying to do, creating an orientation group that would be able to test our outward-facing websites with their assistive technologies, to that idea out to all of the different disability organizations in the state of Wisconsin. And we found 15 people that were willing to do that and engage in our survey. And we actually had all 15 people participate. We got great results from all of them. I was able to compile all of the results from the survey into a report that I was able to give to the webmasters. And so what we found was that we were accessible, but there were some things we could do to make it a little bit more intuitive. And so we were able to make things easier for people to access by making things work better without necessarily giving one person or one group of people with disabilities priority for access over another. And so we were still able to work within the framework, the legal framework, but now we have an actual feedback group to let us know that all the things that we were doing were correct. And when I submitted that, they were so pleased with it, they gave me the chance to present my information to Christina Boardman and Scott Lowry, who are the Secretary of the Department of Transportation and the Deputy Secretary. And so it was quite an honor to be able to present my findings to them. And again, by taking initiative, people gave me more and more chances. Even though I really wasn't super qualified in the beginning to do any of these things, I took the initiative and tried to do what I could to deliver deliverables to everybody. And so I was asked to share some lessons learned, and so that's what these are. The first thing is understand your role. Every culture that you exist in is different. Take some time to understand who you are in the room and what's expected of you in each situation. Again, I told you I have an overdeveloped sense of self. And so one of the first meetings that I was in, I didn't really know who was also in the room with me. I thought we were just discussing a program that was coming up, and I didn't truly understand what it was. And so I started asking ignorant questions. And at the time, I should have just been quiet in the room. But I didn't know enough to know that I should have been quiet, and I wasn't intuitive enough to understand what was actually happening. And so the person who was the fourth most powerful person in charge of the Department of Transportation was there, and she dressed me down when I started asking questions that were ignorant. And my feelings were hurt, like, who is this person? Well, I found out why. and so my question or my comment to all of you is, when we're in situations, we always want to try and know who we are in the room and the context in which we exist, which would allow us to try and figure out the best way to bring value in that situation. So always know who you are in the room. We all want to help, but clarify the ask before you jump in and try and make improvements. Kind of along the same idea, I wasn't qualified to even ask questions about the situation, and so that's the reason why I probably should have been quiet in that situation. Volunteer and take initiative. Be there in person as often as you can. Smile and be nice to everyone. You might not know who's in the elevator with you. Well, one of the things that they did to me, but with me, and it was really one of the best parts of my internship, I was on the 9th floor of the Hills office building in Madison, and that's where most of the executives for the Department of Transportation have their offices. And what they did is they put me in the only open cube right in the corner, right by the elevator. So it turns out that every single executive had to walk by my desk every single morning. And when I first got the internship, the opportunity was to go in when you wanted, or you could work from home. Well, one of my privileges are I have easy access to transportation. And so I thought, hey, it would be great if I could show up in person. And so I would get there every single day before 7 a.m., which is normally before other people would get there. And everyone would walk by me, and I was able to greet everyone and kind of get to know everybody on the office floor just by being there and being friendly every single day. And I didn't really know very many people, but they knew I was the intern. And some people sympathized with me. They're like, I used to be the intern, and they put me here too, and I know how hard it is. And I asked June about it, and she said, it wasn't super intentional, but sometimes people ask to be moved, or they actually want to have another wall around them so they can get their work done. And she said, people miss opportunities if they do that because they're not interacting with people on a daily basis. One of the neat things that they gave me the chance to do because of my experience was to do a program called a Lunch and Learn. And that's a 60-minute program that people can just watch online. And they have them in lots of different experiences or lots of different specifications. And so I was able to do one on general diversity and disability, and it was the most attended Lunch and Learn they had ever had, with over 167 people who attended. And what was interesting was, before that, everybody knew me as the intern. But then, after I did that program, by showing them another layer of myself, when I was out and about and in the elevators, people interacted with me, they knew my name, and they gave me the chance to have more friendships with people. And so I would always say, if you have another specialty that you can bring to people, you try and find a way to include that so people get to know a lot of different versions of you. Say yes to everything if you have the support. When June would ask me to do things, I would always say yes, but I would always say, but if I get hung up, may I come to you and will you offer me guidance? And she always did, and so that was extra special, but I always had to ask for it if I needed it. And by getting that extra support, it did make me feel that I wasn't an imposter, because she created what we call a psychologically safe environment that allowed me to ask questions that might be uncomfortable for me and not necessarily feel like I would be punished or would be liked any less because of something that I didn't know. And be what you want. The best way to show people who you are is to show them how best you fit into their system. This is a really big thing. I am an advocate. When I walk into a place, I notice if the drinking fountains are not at the right level, because I know what I need. And if there's not a door opener, electric door opener, I see that and all that stuff. And I thought, when I first got there, that's one of the reasons why they wanted me to be there. Now, it's the state of Wisconsin. They do have to make those changes if there's something not up to standard. But in the first little while when I was there, I started pointing out everything. And they were happy to make those changes, but it didn't necessarily make me friends with anybody. What happened was, when I would be around people, people would start walking on eggshells else, and they would walk in the room and make sure everything was accessible and fine for me, but it wasn't the friendly conversation that I would be looking for when I first came in. And so what I realized was I can still bring value if there is something that I need to have changed, but I'm not the accessibility police. And if I tried to make that my identity, what would happen is it started making me feel like people were a little standoffish. And so I wanted to present the best version of myself in the environment that we'll talk about in a little bit, to try and make me as successful as I can possibly be. So I still, if I needed to advocate for myself or for other people, I would do it, but I wouldn't do it with my hat on, my ADA police hat on. I've tried to tone it down a little bit. Career opportunities. Truly, what I got from the internship was something that I didn't know I needed, but now I have. And what that is remember when I was going through all of my experiences and lived experiences in the beginning? That didn't translate on a job application and in interviews to for people to really understand the things that I was good at. But what happened was, by me being able to complete the internship and then take my talent stack and put it into all of the things that they asked me to do, it gave me a list of things that I could show people that I was capable of doing with the things that I was really good at. And I didn't have that example that I could use to leverage into job interviews to let people know that I really would be a person who would be qualified to do those jobs. And so the greatest gift that I received was an ability to translate my experiences into practical work experiences that I would be able to do, or I would be able to leverage into a job application. The other thing that I was given, and I didn't realize how powerful it was an identity. I'm a person with a disability, pretty easy one. But what I was also looking for was a work identity. When I go to job sites to try and figure out what jobs I should be applying for, well, how would I even know what jobs I'd be qualified for? And so through this process, June would tell me, well, this is this part of this job, blah, blah, blah. But what she truly gave me, she said, based on the work that you've done for us, you're a policy analyst. And I went, I'm a policy analyst. And what I learned was, you're never the thing until someone who is the thing, or or a person who manages the thing, unless they tell you and identify you as that thing. It's kind of like the end of the Wizard of Oz. Remember when the great wizard went and gave all of the different people the things that gave them the credibility to be the thing that they were? Well, that's what I got from doing this internship. I got the credibility and the identity from a person who knew to tell me who I was within the specific work context. And so that's one of the most valuable things I received out of the whole experience. Okay, code switching. These are just 3 things that I wanted to talk specifically about that helped me succeed within the work environment. And then we'll take some questions if that's okay with everybody. How many of you have ever heard of the concept of code switching before? Great, okay. Code switching is a really neat idea. And generally, it's the idea that we present a different version of ourselves in every environment to try and be successful. And so what I always like to think of is when I was a kid, my mom always asked me, I was born without any legs, and so I was little, and I had family responsibilities. And my mom said, you have to clean everything in the house from this far down, like the floors and that kind of stuff, because I was on the floor, I was doing those things. And I wouldn't do it very well. And so she would be, from time to time, very angry with me because I wasn't doing the things she had asked. And she would be yelling at me at the top of her lungs, oh my goodness, da, 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 da. And then, out of the blue, the phone would ring. And my mom would instantly stop yelling at me, go over to the Princess phone on the wall, answer it, and she was the nicest person in the world right in the middle of yelling at me. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, what's happening? This is not justice. Who is even this person? Well, what happened was she was code switching into the best person that she needed to be in that environment. I think we're all probably a little different when we're shopping than we're at church. I know I'm different around my fiance than I'm around my friends. I know when I go home and I'm, taking care of my mom, I'm a different version of myself, maybe than a version of myself in the work environment. And so one of the things I always try and make people understand is there's really good parts to this. In fact, we know now from science that when you fall in love with someone, the initial love chemicals that are created when you're with someone, they fade after about a year and a half. And so what we need to do is to try and create new love chemicals with that person. And a very easy way to do that is to see that person in lots of different environments. And so you can see all of the different versions of the people that they are. Like my fiancée, Stacy, she used to go to a lot of my speeches. And she would always stand in the back. And I'd always say, well, why do you stand in the back? And why do you like this so much? And she said, well, because people really like you. And they fall in love with you when you're talking. And then I can fall in love with you through their eyes, which is a really neat way to create those new love chemicals. I always say, if you have the chance and you're with your partner, go home to their family around the holiday season, because their family totally loves them in a completely different way than you love them, and you'll be able to fall in love with your partner through their family's eyes. It's also important why we want to see our partners on vacation, when maybe they don't have all of the stresses and things like that they're normally carrying around, so you can see a different version of the person that you're in love with. And I really like that idea about code switching. But there's another problem with code switching, and that is sometimes people who don't necessarily fit into majority culture have to change who they present to everybody else to try and fit in. And depending on the culture, that can be very, very difficult. Back when I first had my first job in 1996, I was working for AT&T, and the building that we were in still wasn't accessible. So every single day when I went to work, I would actually have to climb 7 stairs. Now in the summer, it's not that big of a deal. I get out of my wheelchair, I carry my wheelchair up the steps, I go down, I carry my bag up and down the stairs. But in the middle of winter, that's a 3 costume change day for me, because I'd have to get up in the morning, and then, by the way, I'd have to get there before everybody else, because I was operating in a sales environment which was very highly competitive. And I couldn't show everybody how difficult it was for me to do my job, because they would probably go, well, if that's that hard for him, he probably doesn't have the energy to do the other things, and so we're not going to have him lead the group, because, he's crippled, and my goodness, blah, blah, blah. Well, the problem is I couldn't let people see how hard it was for me, so I'd have to get there early. And again, on the snowy days, we had a person who loved to plow, but he loved to plow all of the snow right into the handicap parking place, because that was the place that didn't have the curbs, and it was the easiest place for them to leave all the snow. And so when I would go, I would have to have my shovel that I actually bungee attached to the back of my chair. And so when I would get out of my car, I would have to shovel the place for my wheelchair to get out, and then shovel my way in. Now, it wasn't that they didn't shovel, but most times when they shovel, they only shovel about 15 inches. That's not as wide as my wheelchair, so I'd have to shovel the other side. And then when I'd get to the stairs, well, sometimes the stairs would be cleaned off and sometimes they wouldn't. And so I'd have to get out of my wheelchair, I'd have to get on the stairs, and I'd have to carry my wheelchair up and then carry my bag up. Now that makes my butt wet. That's the end of my first pair of clothes. So now I got into the office, I would have to change my clothes, and I'd wear the clothes that I would normally have at work. And then at the end of the day, everybody thought I was a really dedicated employee, because I would stay to the very end when everybody else would leave, because again, I'd have to reverse that situation, and I couldn't let anybody see how hard it was. And so by the time I would, in my dress clothes from work, carry my wheelchair down the stairs, I'd have a wet butt again, and I'd have to have a pair of dry clothes in the car to drive home. So that created an environment for me that was significantly harder than other people, but because I wanted to succeed in the work environment, I had to work a lot harder. Now, I just gave you my specific instance, but disability creates that extra friction in a lot of people's lives. And unfortunately, in many work environments, we have to eat that in order to try and be successful in the environment, to try and present the best version of ourselves, so people see us and they assume we have as much potential as we can possibly have. So we are given all of the same responsibilities and the chances to succeed at work, just like able-bodied people are. And so when we talk about empathy and space and grace for someone, truly, we have no idea what other people are trying to do to try and fit in most environments. And so a lot of times when people are having bad days or things like that, I try not to impose my worldview. So that's an illustration of code switching. Positive intention. Assume the best in every interaction. People generally want to help people who are helping themselves. Very few people get up in the morning and go, I'm going to try and hurt somebody with a disability's feelings. However, there are these things called microaggressions. And sometimes people say things that are a little insensitive because they don't truly know what my experience is. In those moments, I say to myself, well, this is a person that I could educate right now, or this is somebody that I could have a little bit of empathy for and try and share more about what my experience is actually like to try and broaden their perspective. And so very, very seldom do I ever try and hurt somebody's feelings as much as they're hurting mine. What I try and do is turn it into a learning situation, maybe not even in that moment, but in the future, because that's what creates a healthy work culture, not necessarily taking out your feelings on somebody else, even when they do poor things. I operate with the best of assumption rule. Yes, I'm a person who says highly inappropriate things sometimes for effect, but I'm not out there every day trying to get people's goats. I'm trying to make points and trying to illustrate my perspective and to other people so they understand maybe a little bit about what I'm going through. So I would assume best intentions with people. Usually people are not educated to all of the right things to say to people with disabilities the way they might be to other minority groups around the United States. And finally, cultural inclusion. Workplaces genuinely value integrate people from all backgrounds and abilities, not just tolerating differences, but actively creating environments where everyone can contribute and thrive. Frame your experience positively. Problem-solving skills, adaptability, and unique perspectives are valuable. Again, this has a lot to do with when I was trying to be the accessibility police and wanting to make everything perfect, not only for me, but all the other people that have disabilities. It created a little bit of friction in the interactions that I had with people. So I toned it down, but I was an advocate when I needed to be, or I helped other people be advocates when I thought they needed to be, but not necessarily in a hard, ham-fisted sort of way. Does anyone have any questions that I might be able to ask or answer for you? Or does anybody want to know any more, possibly about the internship? Sally's here, and so if anybody wants specific information about the internship, she might be able to give that to you as well. Really? No questions? I always say, honestly, I take questions about everything too. And so if there's... Yes, good. Oh, thank you.
Okay. So you said assume the best in every interaction. People are generally want help people are helping themselves. What about the people that don't want to help themselves? How do you deal with that frustration?
Well, I have a sister who's as able-bodied as you can possibly be. And so I want to take this out of the disability context and put it into a people context. And she's angry for a lot of reasons that I don't necessarily understand, and I don't think she does either. But I think her lived experience is quite different than mine. I try to have extra empathy with her because I think I got more attention than she did when I was growing up from my parents. And so I think that probably changed her worldview a little bit. But what I try and do is bring positivity to her as much as I possibly can and support her in the things that she does. And so I don't want to tell you to eat it, but in many times it's not necessarily about a disability, it's about a person's lived experience. And I truly think that disability sometimes can give people a harder situation to deal with than others. But I'll tell you, I think I've met way more angry, able-bodied people walking around than people with disabilities. Because I think the unique situation of disability sometimes broadens people's experiences and expectations for what they can achieve in life. And so I think it gives us a little bit more general empathy for other people and maybe what they're going through based on what we're going through.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So I'm hard of hearing or deaf, yeah. And I was born with hearing loss. I'm trying to find information on the internet. Like just, for example, trying to communicate with staff and I'm having a hard time understanding, people when doing that. I try to read lips if I don't have an interpreter, I'm not, because I'm hard of hearing, but not, I can voice, but sometimes I feel like I need interpreters with me so I can understand. So like I have the words there, but it's really hard to try to find interpreters, a schedule for interpreters. I live in an apartment, and I have a table set up there, and I have my papers like stacked up on the table, and I'm just trying to understand and explain to my mom and to other people, you know, my experience. And sometimes I just can't understand what they're saying to me, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I feel like I need interpreters with me for that can use American Sign Language to communicate with me. You know, so like if I'm having a meeting or something like that. So that's very tough for me because I can't hear and I can't just read lips and stuff like that. So sometimes I have to look at my mom when she's with me, and my mom will try to explain it to me, like what that person is saying to me, like in the workplace, so I can actually understand what's going on. And then I try to read their lips on top of it, but, you know, I can't always pick up all the words. You know, and then they'll ask me to like sign my name or read some document or something like that, but you know, they'll ask me questions on the phone, but like if I'm on the phone, like I can't hear, right? So, you know, and then I'll have to keep asking them, what? Say it again. And then the person on the phone, you know, will, you know, either, you know, say something really quietly, and it can be difficult. So I need it to either be louder or something, but yeah, and then it's hard and difficult for me to understand, and I try to understand what they say, like I'm deaf, I try to explain that, or hard of hearing, or however I want to call myself, and it is a disability, you know, where I, you know, need communication access, but yeah, so every place, you know, that I go, you know, they just don't understand my experience.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take a question out of that. And what I want to tell you is it's very lonely applying for jobs. And one of the privileges that we have is actually having a disability. And I know it doesn't necessarily sound like that makes sense, but what happened specifically in my situation was when I was able to apply for the internship, not only did I receive an internship, but I received support from Sally and from the board. And when I was trying to accomplish it on my own, I was competing against everybody in a very highly competitive situation, and I wasn't making any headway at all. But I was able to leverage my disability within another context, and I allowed Sally and her organization to be my advocate and to help me with the accommodations that I would need in every situation. And also, they take on a lot of the responsibility of negotiating those accommodations with the placements that they have within the fellowships and the internships. And so right now, I think what you're going through is that you're feeling like you're by yourself.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, without interpreters, it's hard.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Impossible. And so, but that's why you're here today. You're here today to get support. It's a self-determination conference, and you are determining your future by making connections and learning about things that are going to give you, I always say, a leg up to try and be funny. Get it? No legs? Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
It gives me an advantage because it gives me support that I wouldn't normally have, but more importantly, it gives me the support that other able-bodied people don't even have, and advocates when I don't know that I need advocates. And so I believe that you should talk to Sally afterwards and find out a little bit more about the internship and the fellowship programs, and what they will do, and it's part of their mission, to make everything as accessible and inclusive as they possibly can. So I know what you're feeling right now on some level is it's an insurmountable task. And there just isn't enough resources for me out there in order to have a successful work outcome. But specifically, when you're here, and you have the ability to be around Sally, that's her job, to try and help as many people as she could possibly have, or as she possibly can, to have the experiences that you're looking for. So I'm really glad you're here. And I'm really glad you asked the question, because what I'm trying to do right now, more than anything, is give you hope. And that's one of the things that I'm still having a hard time with. I've applied for many, many jobs, and I've got great interviews. Unfortunately, my whole life is trying to promote myself and sell myself in these interviews, and that's not what they're looking for. And so because I had the opportunity to have the internship within the Department of Transportation, when they don't hire me, it gives me privilege to reach back out to the HR person and say, can you specifically tell me what I did wrong so I can improve myself? That is not a privilege most able-bodied people have, because they didn't have the experience of having the internship and the relationships that I now have with the people that work with the DOT. And so, believe me, there's hope. And there is a rainbow and light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to be in the right tunnel, and I think you found it today. So thank you very much for being here, and I really believe that Sally can help you with that.
Awesome. We're gonna wrap it up. If you have any questions for Matt, I'm sure he'll stick around and answer
As
them.
long as you want.
I know we've kept you a little bit over. If you can complete the evaluation on the table, that would be great. You can just circle the 5 to 1, and I will pick them up. But if you have any additional questions, please, Matt will
much.
be happy to
Appreciate it.
talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you. And thank you. Thanks, Matt. It was great.
Thank you.